The morning mist clung to the auction yard like a thin, chilling veil, swallowing the dull noise of early arrivals. The air was heavy with dust, and the scent of damp earth mixed faintly with the metallic tang of old machinery and worn leather. A crowd gathered, a restless sea of murmurs and sideways glances, but all eyes were fixed on one corner, where a single horse stood alone. He was a creature out of place, a wild shadow against the muddy ground, muscles taut beneath a coat marred by scars and dirt. His eyes, wide and frantic, flicked between the strangers around him. Some called him a monster. Others whispered he was dangerous, broken beyond repair. Yet no one dared approach him. They kept their distance, as if proximity might invite the chaos they feared. The auctioneer's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and relentless. Starting bid, $50. His hammer hovered, ready to strike. But the bids never came. The horse shifted uneasily, nostrils flaring as if smelling the crowd's fear. At that moment, a man stepped forward from the back of the crowd, a figure defined by quiet determination rather than showy confidence. His boots barely made a sound on the gravel, and his eyes, calm and steady, locked onto the horse. There was no judgment in his gaze, only understanding. Weathered hands folded across his chest, his breath visible in the cool air. The auctioneer looked at the man curiously as he raised his hand. $50, the farmer offered, voice soft but unwavering. Laughter rippled through the crowd. You don't want that beast, a voice sneered. He'll never be worth a dime. But the farmer didn't flinch. I'll take him, he said simply. The hammer fell. The crowd parted, whispers trailing behind as the farmer approached the horse. The animal's body stiffened, his wild eyes narrowing in suspicion. He backed against the fence, nostrils flaring, teeth bared in a low growl. The whispers of monster seemed to echo in the air around them. The farmer didn't rush. He dropped his bag slowly, knelt down with deliberate care, and let his hands rest gently on his knees. His voice was barely more than a breath. Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you. For a long moment, the horse didn't move. Then, hesitantly, his massive head lowered just a fraction, as if testing the sincerity of this strange, new presence. The farmer extended a hand, fingers curled like a fragile offering. The horse's breathing slowed, a subtle trembling passing through his frame. Time stretched, fragile and fragile again. The world around them seemed to still, the crowd, the hammer, the cold morning itself. In that suspended moment, something fragile bloomed, a thread of trust, barely visible, but growing stronger. Slowly, the farmer reached forward, fingertips brushing the coarse fur along the horse's neck. The animal flinched at first, then relaxed just enough to lean into the touch, the faintest sign of surrender. They stayed like that for several long breaths, two battered souls finding a moment of quiet understanding amid the chaos. The auction yard began to empty, the crowd's interest shifting elsewhere. The farmer rose, steady and sure, and fastened a worn leather halter over the horse's head. He whispered soft reassurances, each word a balm for old wounds. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, the horse's wild eyes held a glimmer of something new, hope. As they walked away from the auction, the farmer's hand rested lightly on the horse's broad shoulder. He didn't speak. Words weren't needed yet. The fading lights stretched long shadows across the ground, painting their path in warm hues. Behind them, the auction yard stood silent and empty, the echoes of cruelty and fear left behind like broken chains. The farmer's name was Jacob, a man whose hands had known hardship, but whose heart held a deep capacity for kindness. He had lived quietly on the edge of the countryside for years, tending to the land and the animals that called it home. His life was simple, but it was shaped by a patience that many had mistaken for weakness. But Jacob's gentleness was his greatest strength. He saw not a monster, but a survivor, a soul battered by a world that didn't understand him. In those eyes, he glimpsed the flicker of a story waiting to be rewritten. The horse, whom the world had cast aside, was his burden now, and Jacob would carry it without complaint. That first night, beneath a sky scattered with stars, the horse stood silently in the barn's shadow. He was still wary, muscles tight with the remnants of fear, but he didn't try to escape. Jacob fed him slowly, offering handfuls of sweet hay and cool water. He spoke in quiet tones, recounting stories of the land, the seasons, and the gentle rhythms of life. The horse listened, ears twitching, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar sounds. Slowly, The tension in his body began to ease, like ice melting under a tentative sun. But even in the quiet moments, shadows lurked beneath the surface. The horse flinched at sudden movements. The echo of raised voices made his muscles coil like springs. His past was a silent storm, unpredictable and dark. Jacob sensed this. He didn't rush. Trust was not given freely. It had to be earned. Days passed in measured steps. The farmer and the horse moved together like hesitant dancers, learning each other's rhythms and boundaries. The horse's wildness softened, though the scars, both visible and hidden, remained. Each touch, each whispered word, was a small victory. But the journey was only beginning. Jacob's neighbors whispered their doubts. "Why waste your time on that beast?" they asked. "He'll never be tamed." But Jacob only smiled quietly, knowing that sometimes the most broken things held the greatest potential for healing. At night, as the farm lay bathed in moonlight, the horse would gaze out toward the distant hills. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him longed to be free, not just from a farm, but from the shadows that haunted his mind. Jacob watched him, understanding that this was more than a physical rescue. It was a fight for the horse's very soul. And though the path was steep and uncertain, Jacob was ready. Because sometimes the gentlest touch was all it took to change everything. As the first section of their story closed, the horizon stretched wide and full of promise. The night wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a quiet hope, a hope that the so-called monster might one day find peace. The auction yard was far behind them now, a memory of cruelty and misunderstanding. Ahead lay something new, a chance for redemption, for trust, for a bond forged in patience and kindness. And as the stars blinked softly overhead, Jacob whispered once more to the horse, "You're safe now. We'll face it all together." The horse blinked slowly, nostrils flaring in the cool air. For the first time, he didn't pull away. And that was enough. The morning sun spilled golden light over the farm, casting long shadows across the fields as Jacob moved quietly through the barn. The horse was already awake, standing near the far wall, eyes wary but calmer than the day before. He shifted his weight uneasily, the muscles beneath his scarred coat still tight with remnants of old fears. Yet something in the way he watched Jacob spoke of a fragile truce, a beginning of trust. Jacob approached slowly, hands open and steady. He didn't rush the horse or demand anything. Instead, he knelt once more, speaking softly, his voice low and steady. "Good morning, friend." No grand promises, no sudden movements, only gentle presence. The horse's ears flicked, nostrils twitching, and for a moment, the wildness that had gripped him at the auction seemed to retreat. Tentatively, he took a step forward, then another, until Jacob's hand brushed lightly against his muzzle. The touch was slow, deliberate, meant to reassure without pressure. Days turned into weeks, each one a quiet battle fought in small moments. Jacob never pushed too hard, but he never stepped back either. The horse learned to trust his voice, the warmth of his hands, the rhythm of his slow breathing. And in return, Jacob began to see glimpses of the animal beneath the scars, the horse who once ran free in sun-drenched fields, not a monster, but a survivor. But healing was never simple. The shadows of the past clung to the horse like a second skin. Sudden noises, the snap of a branch, the flap of a gate, could send him into a panic. More than once, his body tensed so tightly that Jacob feared he might injure himself trying to flee. On those days, the farmer would sit quietly by his side, patient and unshaken, letting the horse know he was safe. One afternoon, while Jacob was brushing the horse's rough mane, the animal flinched sharply at a distant shout from a farmhouse. His eyes flashed with panic, muscles coiled as if ready to bolt. Jacob's hands didn't retreat. Instead, they pressed gently against the horse's neck, grounding him with a calm that seemed to spread through the air between them. "It's okay," Jacob murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing's coming to get you." Slowly, the horse's breathing steadied, the tension draining from his body. Jacob's heart ached for the animal's silent torment, a past no one had dared to uncover. In the evenings, when the farm settled into quiet, Jacob often sat by the horse's side, sharing stories of his own scars, wounds not visible but just as real. He spoke of loneliness, loss, and the stubborn hope that kept him rooted in the earth. "You're not alone," he said softly one night. "We're both broken in ways people don't always see." The horse seemed to listen, ears twitching, eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. It was a fragile connection, but a connection nonetheless. Despite these quiet victories, whispers of doubt circulated beyond the farm's borders. Neighbors watched with thinly veiled skepticism, questioning Jacob's choice. "That horse will never be tamed," they said. "You're wasting your time on a lost cause." Jacob paid them no mind. His eyes were fixed on a different horizon, one only he could see. And deep down, he knew the horse was more than what others believed. One afternoon, a visitor arrived, Maggie, a horse trainer from a neighboring county. She was known for her tough methods, a woman who believed discipline was the key to unlocking a horse's potential. Her gaze was sharp and assessing as she approached the barn, her boots kicking up dust with each step. Jacob greeted her with quiet respect, though a flicker of unease passed through him. Maggie's reputation preceded her, and her presence threatened to disrupt the fragile balance he had worked so hard to build. "This horse," Maggie said, her tone clipped, "he's dangerous. You can't fix him with kindness alone. He needs structured discipline. If you don't control him, he'll control you." Jacob shook his head slowly. "I don't believe in breaking spirits. Trust takes time, more than punishment ever will." Maggie's eyes narrowed. "We'll see how long your patience lasts." Over the following days, Maggie worked alongside Jacob, her methods harsh and demanding. She pushed the horse hard, trying to force obedience through intimidation and routine. But the horse resisted, eyes blazing with fear and defiance. Each session left him more tense, his scars seeming to deepen with every harsh word and raised hand. Jacob watched with growing concern. The horse's trust, so delicately woven, began to unravel like frayed rope. After one particularly rough training session, the horse reared violently, striking out and injuring Jacob's arm with a powerful kick. The pain was sharp and sudden, but it was the look in the horse's eyes that hurt most, a mixture of terror and desperation, a silent plea for help that words could never express. Maggie shook her head. "I told you, this horse is beyond saving." But Jacob refused to give up. As he tended to his wound, he whispered to the horse through the cracked barn door, "We'll get through this. I won't let you fall back into the dark." That night, the farm was cloaked in silence, broken only by the soft breathing of two restless souls. Jacob sat beside the horse, whose body trembled beneath his touch. The wildness hadn't disappeared, but somewhere beneath the surface, something new was stirring. In the soft glow of moonlight, Jacob traced the faded scars on the horse's flank, each one a story of survival. He saw not a monster, but a warrior battered by life's cruelty. "You're stronger than they think," Jacob said, voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "And I'm here every step of the way." The horse leaned into the touch, a hesitant acceptance of the comfort offered. For the first time, the distance between man and beast began to shrink. Days later, Jacob found an old brand beneath the grime on the horse's shoulder, a faint, almost forgotten mark from a past that no one had bothered to remember. The symbol hinted at a lineage of strength and nobility, buried beneath layers of pain and neglect. Jacob's heart lifted with quiet hope. Maybe this horse was more than a survivor. Maybe he was meant for something greater. But the road ahead was still uncertain. Trust was fragile, easily shattered by fear or doubt. Every day was a new challenge, a test of patience and belief. The bond between Jacob and the horse deepened through these trials. With each gentle touch, each whispered word, the monster the world had feared began to fade, replaced by something softer and stronger, a friend, a companion, a soul learning to heal. As the sun dipped low one evening, casting long shadows over the fields, Jacob stood beside the horse, watching the horizon stretch wide and endless. The whispers of the past still lingered, but they were fading, pushed back by the steady light of trust. The horse nuzzled Jacob's hand, a silent promise of a bond forged in patience and hope. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, both man and beast walked forward not as strangers or enemies, but as partners in a story yet to be written. And as the stars began to twinkle softly above, Jacob whispered once more, "We're just getting started." The dawn broke slowly over the farm, casting a soft glow that filtered through the morning haze. Jacob stood at the edge of the pasture, eyes fixed on the horse, grazing cautiously near the fence. The animal's movements were more deliberate now, less jittery, though the wary glances never fully ceased. There was progress, but the scars, both visible and invisible, were stubborn remnants of a harsh past. Jacob's arm throbbed faintly from the kick, a dull reminder of the risks they'd faced. It wasn't pain alone, though. It was the weight of responsibility pressing on his chest. Every step he took with the horse felt like a fragile dance, where one misstep could unravel all they'd built. Yet beneath the struggle, there was an undeniable bond strengthening with each shared moment. Jacob's days began with quiet routines, feeding, grooming, speaking softly in the early light. The horse, whom he'd come to call Bramble for the wild, tangled mane that refused to lie flat, met each morning with a cautious patience. Sometimes, when no one watched, Bramble's lips would twitch as if tasting the possibility of trust for the first time. But old fears were not easily banished. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast and fierce, dark clouds swallowing the horizon. The wind whipped through the trees, sending leaves swirling like restless spirits. Jacob was in the barn when the first thunderclap shattered the sky. Bramble flinched violently, ears pinned back as panic surged in his eyes. Jacob hurried outside, rain lashing against his face, heart pounding with urgency. "Easy, Bramble," he called, voice steady but gentle, edging closer despite the storm's fury. The horse reared, muscles trembling with terror, eyes wild with raw fear. The barn door slammed behind Jacob, and for a moment, chaos threatened to consume them both. But then, as the lightning flickered and rain hammered the earth, something remarkable happened. Jacob didn't shout or force. He lowered himself to the muddy ground, hands outstretched and steady like an anchor in the storm. "I'm here," he whispered. "You're not alone." Slowly, hesitantly, Bramble's frantic breaths began to slow. His shaking eased, the rigid tension melting into cautious calm. The storm outside raged on, but inside that small circle of trust, a fragile peace took root. It was a small victory, a moment when the past's heavy chains loosened, if only for a breath. But the fight was far from over. In the days that followed, Jacob noticed new shadows flickering behind Bramble's eyes, fears deeper than the storm, memories locked away behind a wall of silence. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting the fields in molten gold, Jacob sat beside the horse, tracing faint scars along the rough coat. He thought of the stories the neighbors whispered, the doubts cast like stones by people unwilling to see beyond the surface. "That horse will never change," they said. "He's broken." But Jacob refused to believe in brokenness without hope. As twilight settled, a soft rustle came from the edge of the pasture. Jacob turned to see a figure emerging from the trees, a young girl, no older than 10, her eyes wide with curiosity and a gentle smile that spoke of kindness. She approached cautiously, holding out a handful of wildflowers as an offering. "Hi," she said softly, voice trembling but warm. "I'm Lily." Jacob smiled, nodding in greeting. "And this is Bramble." Lily stepped closer, eyes meeting the horse's with quiet wonder. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "Not a monster." Bramble's nostrils flared, the tension easing slightly in the presence of this new visitor. Lily's calm was a balm, her gentle spirit a quiet challenge to the fear that clung to him. Jacob watched, heart swelling with hope. Perhaps Bramble wasn't just finding a friend in him, but a community. Over the next weeks, Lily became a regular presence on the farm, visiting after school, her laughter weaving into the rhythm of their days. She learned to read Bramble's moods, to sense when he needed space or comfort. In return, Bramble seemed to respond to her light touch, the softness of a child's patience cutting through years of mistrust. Jacob found himself sharing stories with Lily about the horse's past, the auction, the scars, the long road to healing. Her wide eyes reflected not pity, but determination. "We can help him," she said one afternoon, voice fierce with conviction. "We just have to believe." And belief was the fragile thread Jacob clung to. Yet beneath this newfound hope, the past threatened to return with a vengeance. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Jacob noticed Bramble's eyes darken with unease. A distant sound carried on the wind, a truck's engine, harsh and unfamiliar, breaking the farm's peaceful cocoon. Bramble's body tensed, muscles coiled, as if ready to bolt. His ears pinned back, nostrils flaring with the scent of danger. Jacob's heart clenched. The shadows of the auction yard, the cruelty, and fear he'd fought so hard to leave behind seemed to creep closer. The truck pulled into the driveway, and with it came a man, gruff, imposing, eyes cold and calculating. "You're wasting your time," the stranger said, voice sharp and unforgiving. "That horse belongs to me." Jacob stepped forward, muscles tight, but eyes steady. "Not anymore." The man's lips curled into a sneer. "We'll see about that." Tension crackled in the air like static electricity. Bramble's wild spirit surged, nostrils flaring as he pawed the ground, sensing the threat. Jacob's hand found the horse's mane, grounding both himself and Bramble. "Stay," he commanded softly. The stranger laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think you can save him? That beast is dangerous." Jacob's voice was calm but firm. "He's more than you'll ever understand." The confrontation hung heavy between them, a battle of wills without words. For the first time, the past threatened to rip apart the fragile trust Jacob had fought so hard to build. But Jacob stood his ground, unwavering, because some fights were worth every scar, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. The man's gaze flicked to the horse, then back to Jacob, and for a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them, a silent challenge. Then, with a final sneer, the man turned away, the truck's engine roaring to life as he disappeared into the dusk. Jacob exhaled slowly, feeling the storm within him begin to settle. He looked down at Bramble, who nuzzled his hand with a quiet strength. "We're safe for now," Jacob whispered. That night, as the farm lay under a quilt of stars, Jacob sat beside Bramble in the barn. The horse's breathing was calm, steady against the night's stillness. The threat had passed, but the fight was far from over. Jacob knew the road ahead would be littered with challenges, shadows clawing at every step forward. But in Bramble's eyes, he saw something new, a quiet resilience, a spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. And in that moment, Jacob made a silent vow. No matter what came, he would stand by Bramble's side. Because sometimes the fiercest battles were fought not with fists or force, but with patience, trust, and an unshakable belief in second chances. The journey was far from over, but together they would face whatever storms lay ahead. And the story of the horse, once called a monster, was just beginning to unfold. The days that followed carried a quiet intensity, like the calm before a storm. Jacob sensed it in the way Bramble's muscles tensed beneath his touch, in the sharp flicker of his eyes when unfamiliar sounds drifted across the farm. The visitor's threat had unsettled something deep inside the horse, a flicker of old fear, tangled with a fierce determination to survive. Jacob stood in the pasture one crisp morning, the autumn air sharp and fragrant with fallen leaves. Bramble shifted beside him, restless but watchful. Their bond, forged through patience and pain, had grown into something unspoken yet unbreakable. Yet beneath the surface, Jacob knew a test was coming, a moment that would demand everything they had learned, everything they were willing to risk. That afternoon, as shadows stretched long and gold over the farm, the man returned, this time with reinforcements. A group of men with cold eyes and heavy hands, ready to take what they believed was theirs. The auction's cruelty, long buried, now clawed its way back into the light. Jacob's heart hammered as they approached the fence, voices low but edged with threat. "This horse belongs to us," the leader said, stepping forward, voice like gravel. Jacob met his gaze without flinching. "Not anymore. He's not a thing to be owned." The men laughed, harsh and bitter, the sound ripping through the stillness. One stepped toward Bramble, hand reaching out like a predator's claw. Bramble reared, nostrils flaring, eyes blazing with a wild fury born of years of pain and rejection. But Jacob stepped in, voice firm yet gentle, "Easy, boy. Trust me." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The men hesitated, caught between fear and anger, uncertainty flashing in their eyes. Jacob reached for the reins, steadying the horse, their eyes locking in a silent conversation. Bramble's fierce resistance softened just enough for Jacob's hand to guide him. The leader sneered, "You're lucky this time, but we'll be back." Jacob's gaze hardened. "Then I'll be ready." The men left, but the tension lingered like a heavy fog. Jacob knew this confrontation was only the beginning. The auction's shadow still haunted them both. That night, Jacob sat in the barn with Bramble beside him, the horse's breath slow and steady in the dim light. He ran his fingers through Bramble's mane, feeling the strength beneath the scars, the resilience forged in fire. "You're not just a survivor," Jacob whispered. "You're a fighter." The horse nudged his hand, a silent promise that together they would face whatever came next. In the days that followed, Jacob pushed their training further, not with harshness, but with unwavering trust and respect. He taught Bramble to respond to commands, to move with grace and purpose, but always on their terms. Each small victory was a triumph against the darkness that once threatened to consume them. Lily remained a steadfast presence, her youthful spirit a reminder of hope and innocence amid the storm. She watched as Bramble's confidence grew, as his wild eyes softened and his steps became surer. One afternoon, she found Jacob in the field, watching Bramble gallop freely across the pasture, mane flowing like flames in the wind. "He's different now," she said, voice full of wonder. Jacob nodded, a smile breaking through the weariness. "He's learning to believe in himself." But the true test came sooner than expected. The county's annual horse showcase was approaching, a chance to prove Bramble's transformation not just to the farm or neighbors, but to everyone who had ever doubted him. Jacob wrestled with doubt. Was Bramble ready? Could the horse, once labeled a monster, stand proud in the ring? Lily's bright eyes gave him courage. "He's ready. You're ready." On the day of the showcase, the farm buzzed with nervous energy. The air was thick with anticipation, the crowd's murmur weaving through the sunlit arena. Jacob led Bramble into the ring. The horses stepped steady but alert, eyes scanning the sea of faces. He could feel the weight of expectation, the silent judgments that hung like a storm cloud. But then, as the music began, something shifted. Bramble moved with a grace that surprised even Jacob, each step deliberate, every movement a testament to the journey they had shared. The crowd watched in silence, captivated by the horse's transformation. Jacob's heart swelled as he saw the awe in the eyes of those who had once called Bramble a monster. The horse wasn't just tamed, he was reborn. When the final notes faded, the crowd erupted in applause, a wave of acceptance and admiration washing over the arena. Jacob knelt beside Bramble, pressing his forehead to the horse's neck. "We did it, boy. Together." Lily ran up, eyes shining. "You showed them all. You proved them wrong." Tears pricked at Jacob's eyes, not from victory, but from the journey, the scars healed, the battles won, the unyielding spirit that refused to break. That night, back at the farm, Jacob stood outside under a sky glittering with stars, the cool air filled with quiet triumph. Bramble nuzzled his shoulder, their connection deeper than ever. The journey from monster to friend had been long and hard, but it was more than a story of survival. It was a testament to resilience, to the power of trust, and to second chances. Jacob smiled, voice soft in the night air. "This is just the beginning." And as the farm settled into peaceful silence, both man and horse knew they had found something rare and beautiful, a new life, forged not in fear, but in hope. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day, stories of resilience, trust, and the power of second chances. Thank you for sharing this journey.